Spiritual spaces are supposed to be places of healing, liberation, and self-acceptance. And yet, so many fat people, especially fat women and femmes, find that they are judged, excluded, or even made to feel spiritually unworthy in these spaces. Why is that? Hi, my name is Freya. I'm a PhD researcher in women's spirituality. I'm an academic. I run a women's spirituality institute. I'm a creator and an artist. And today I want to talk about fat phobia in spiritual places. Let's get into it. I want to start by sharing a bit of my own journey. No, I have not always been fat, but if you asked me if I was fat at 16 years old, I would have said yes. Why? Because the people closest to me made me feel that I was. And it was also painfully obvious in all the messaging that I was given that fat equals bad. And so, for as long as I can remember, I had incredibly unhealthy relationships, not just with food and exercise, with my own body, but I had no clue how to be healthy. And I had no clue that for a very long time I actually was healthy. And this feeling of not knowing about my body, not being in touch with my body, feeling as if I was unhealthy, feeling as if I was fat and therefore bad, this idea that connects the two, right? That led me into terrible, terrible places and spaces. It led me into, damaging practices towards my body, drinking in excess, really bad relationships. And it took a really, really long time for me to even see the correlation between the two. Now, I don't want to just throw that out as like a blanket statement, as if everyone's journey is like mine. And if you experienced abuse or assault of any kind, and you were also fat and made to feel unworthy about your body, that those two things are just inherently connected, because that's not true. But it is for me. And I've done a lot of work in therapy and spiritually around that idea, so I know that it is for me. And that was like a really, really rude awakening in terms of how you think about yourself and how that equates to how you let other people treat you. I've also developed a bunch of autoimmune diseases, and about 2 years ago, I hurt my spine so badly that I could not stand upright for like minutes on end. I'd have to sit, and then I would sit, I'd be in pain, so I'd lay down, I was in pain. There was no relief, and I'm still dealing with the repercussions of that. I'm still recovering. And this journey with my body runs parallel to the journey of my spirituality. So I found goddess groups, red tents, women's circles, witch fests. I did my yoga teacher training. I'm now director of a women's spirituality institute. So I have been around the block in terms of fatness and spirituality. And I also worked as a plus size model for like the majority of my career. I was in Milan Fashion Week. I've done stuff with Vogue. I've done, Buffalo Zine, Document Journal, Torrid, Dia and Co. Like I've been around the block in terms of how these things are like interconnected and related to each other. And also, that means that I'm no stranger to the things that strangers on the internet want to say to you, the kinds of comments that they leave about you and your body. In fact, I receive so many hate and like fat comments directed at me on these YouTube videos that I make, on my social media. Yeah. So pretending like they hurt, or I'm sorry, pretending like they don't hurt would be a lie, because as strong as you want to be and as much as you know that it's more of a reflection of somebody else and not of you, it still hurts to receive those things. But I receive them often. I receive them less now than when I was working as a model, basically like full time. And I think that's because when people see a confident woman in her body, or what they perceive to be confident, and her body doesn't match what you think bodies that are beautiful should match, people have a really hard time with that. Men in particular have a hard time with that, but women have a hard time with that as well, and I've received comments from everyone. I'm also a fat white woman dating a very thin black man, and if you know the stereotype, then you already know the kinds of comments I also get around my relationship and my body and what they think the dynamic of my relationship is. I even received a comment just this morning saying, oh yeah, your boyfriend must be black because they like BBWs or whatever the hell it was. And not only is that incredibly racist, it's just stupid. I'm not doing the beep thing, and if I curse, I will get recommended to people. Like, I learned that the hard way. It's just stupid. I mean, when you leave comments like that, or you think that way about people, or you make comments like that about people, you're just showing how uneducated and stupid you are. Again, does it bother me? Yeah, a little bit. But I think it bothers me more because, like, why are you looping in, like, one of the greatest things in my life, my relationship, and you are diminishing it down to what people look like? Not the love they have for each other, not the things that they've gone through together, the life they've experienced or built together, but you're fat and white and he's thin and black, and so your relationship is only built on the stereotype that society has created. You're an idiot. Again, I mostly ignore these things, but that doesn't mean that they go away just because I ignore them or I delete the comments or whatever it is, right? So I wanted to dig into this topic a little more. I wanted to dig deeper. I wanted to see what people were saying about fatphobia and what people were saying about fatphobia in spiritual places. Why am I linking the two? Well, that's the majority of my work. Those are the spaces that I am in most often. And those are the spaces where I see it often, and sometimes in sneaky ways. And so I've read a lot of stuff, I looked at my own experience, and I interviewed some of my friends. And here's what I have discovered. Fatphobia is prevalent in spiritual spaces, yoga studios, wellness retreats, goddess circles, even churches. All are often saturated with subtle and not so subtle fatphobia. There's an emphasis on lightening, purifying, and the visual branding usually leans towards thin white women in flowy clothes. There's an implicit message being sent about what a quote-unquote spiritual body looks like. Many people are taught that fatness is a sign of being out of alignment or disconnected from the divine. A friend of mine shared the following with me. I've been told that my body was a reflection of blocked energy, like my fat body was a spiritual failure. It was also an unsolicited comment. I'm just gonna let that sink in. Okay. There are also people who link what one eats to their spirituality. Now, I understand that this is really nuanced. There are a lot of cultures and communities and religious traditions that have restrictions on what you eat, like not eating meat, for example. I'm not really talking about that. I'm talking more about the white Western world and this idea that if you eat certain foods, or you don't eat certain foods, that you're not really practicing spirituality. I think a lot about veganism when I say this. And it's so much less about culture. And oftentimes, it's not even really about someone's love and desire to not harm animals. I'm totally behind this concept. But a lot of that judgment that happens in relation to our diet and the kinds of foods or the kind of diet trends we follow is really steeped in classism, as opposed to a real spiritual desire for living a no harm or minimal harm lifestyle. I was vegan for a really long time, for example, still fat. And people were always shocked when they found out I was vegan. And mind you, this was like 8 years ago. And, trigger warning, I'm going to name some weight numbers. I was probably 50 to 60 pounds lighter. And people were like, oh my God, you're vegan? You eat salads and drink juices? It's like they couldn't wrap their heads around it. It has nothing to do with what you look like and everything to do with classism and people's perception of what they think health, wellness, and spirituality are supposed to look like. Speaking of classism, fatphobia is rooted in whiteness, colonialism, and patriarchy. Fatphobia's got racist roots. Dr. Sabrina Strings, in her book, Fearing the Black Body, The Racial Origins of Fatphobia, documents how the modern obsession with thinness is tied to anti-blackness in the 18th and 19th centuries. So she argues that European colonizers began to associate fatness with blackness and quote-unquote savagery, while idealizing slenderness as a symbol of white civility, control, and superiority. And I quote, "What we now call obesity was once seen as evidence of greed, laziness, or lack of self-control. All stereotypes projected onto Black bodies by white supremacist ideologies." So there is another link here to Black spiritualities, and I like Black spiritual practices as being quote unquote demonic. And I wrote an article about Black magic versus white magic for Feminism and Religion. You can check it out. I'll link it below. But I relied heavily on the work of Dr. Yvonne Choureau, and you should read this book right here. It's very excellent. And also, I just found out that she was a cultural consultant for Sinners, and that makes so much sense, and no wonder it was so good. So you should definitely check her work out. Anyway, we also have to examine purity culture. Christian influenced spirituality, even when it's repackaged as New Age, has often emphasized control of the body. Women's bodies, especially, were and are expected to be small, pure, contained, and pleasing, both to men and God. Fatness disrupts these ideals. A fat woman, especially a confident one, is a threat to the patriarchal order. But the goddess doesn't care about your fat body, as demonstrated by these beautiful fat goddess figurines. The goddess is the abundance of the earth and the cosmos. She takes up space. But just because the goddess doesn't care doesn't mean the women in goddess spaces have decolonized their minds enough to do the same. But that's a convo for another time. So I actually checked in with my boyfriend about this topic because in almost every women's circle I attend, someone is talking about the body. Someone's bringing up the body. Hell, it's like probably me, because we have so many thoughts and ideas around our bodies, and are they good, or have they experienced body boundary violations? I mean, I just feel like in a women's circle, someone somewhere is talking about the body. And so I was curious if this was happening in men's spiritual spaces, because how the hell would I know? And so I asked him. And the short answer he gave me was no one's really talking about their bodies. He couldn't think of an instance where they were. And so I probed a little deeper, and under the surface, he said that there's sometimes a bit of conversation around the strength of the body, or their health, or their vitality. but that there is usually, this is from his experience, never a conversation of shame around the body, of the body not being worthy. And I thought that was really interesting. And, I could go in a whole rabbit hole of how women and femmes are conditioned versus how masculine bodies are conditioned in society, the language, the marketing, the subliminal messages, gender roles. We could have a whole freaking conversation, right? But I find it interesting in the way that it manifests. And I've had this conversation before about how sometimes women are like the biggest upholders of the patriarchy. And you see that often in like Western spaces. And so, women are always bringing up the body and they're talking about the body and they're making me feel some type of way about my body. And it's not happening in the men's space. But I still pushed a little further because, men are not always as forthcoming with information if they don't think it's relevant. And so I had asked him, when you're in a group dynamic and you have to like pair up or partner up or, navigate towards people or whatever, is what a person looks like on your mind. Because I have found in a lot of women's spirituality spaces that fat bodies and fat people are like picked last. It's like the softball game where they're like picking the nerd last. That's how I often feel and how people have expressed to me that, there's like an aversion to being in a group with that person because they don't fit with the aesthetic of the space. And my partner said that he tends to gravitate towards men who feel similar to him. And I found that to be interesting. I'm not a psychologist or anything, so I don't really know what that says about perceptions of others, but I am really interested to hear from the men on this. Do you experience conversations or shame around larger bodies in spiritual spaces, in men's groups, and just like men's hangout in general? I'd love to know, do you experience fat phobia in the same way that maybe women are experiencing it? So let me know. My partner is also not the kind of person who really judges people immediately based on what they look like. Like he doesn't apply some sort of like moral failing on them because they look a certain kind of way. So everyone's experience could be different. So men, for once, I'd like to hear from you. That's not something you're going to hear me say often. I'm joking. But I really want to hear from you. Anyways, here are the ways that I have noticed and that have been expressed to me that fat phobia shows up in spiritual spaces. 1, language. Terms like detoxing, lightening your vibration, etc., are often code words for messages about the body. 2, being the only fat person there. I cannot tell you how many times I've been the only fat person in the room, and some of it is my fault, right? Some of it is me just noticing and being aware and some sort of internalized fat phobia for sure. A lot of it is not. And anyone who has experienced this knows what I'm talking about. 3, people assuming that you need help or instruction in the yoga room or wherever without you asking for it. Oh my God. Please, if other people experience this, please let me know in the comments. This happens to me all the time. Unsolicited, like yoga or body advice. And maybe I am, doing some sort of adjustment because I'm still dealing with a lot of pain in my body. Maybe physiologically I can't do it. Maybe I just can't do that, like, position. You know what I mean? So can't a lot of other people in the room. I think the point is, why do you assume that you have the right to go up to the fat person who hasn't asked for your advice and give your unsolicited advice if you're not doing it to the thin people? If you're going to be annoying and give unsolicited advice, give it to everyone, or else your fat phobia is showing. It's that easy. 4, seating, altar spaces, yoga mats, not accommodating fat bodies. If I literally can't sit in the little like baby seats that you've gotten, I don't feel good. I don't know if I want to be here. And I don't know, are we on 5, 6? I don't know where we are. 5, spiritual gaslighting. Being told that your fatness is a manifestation of the trauma or that your weight blocks abundance. Oh my goodness. I have another quote from a friend of mine. A healer once told me that if I forgave my parents, I would lose weight. Like my body was just trauma made visible. I left the space feeling more broken than when I came in. If you're going to someone for help with trauma, some kind of healing, and instead of like addressing the root, like in this person's instance, things that have gone on with their parents, they were just like, well, you should lose some weight. It's like when you go to the doctor and you're like, hey, I think my liver is hanging out of my stomach. And they're like, have you considered losing weight? I'm losing my liver. Like what are we doing? What are we talking about right now? Wild. So why do I think this is happening? Well, spirituality is experiencing a huge wave of commodification. And I think that's actually been happening for a long time. But I think with social media and the commodification of spiritual and wellness practices making so much money for people that it's sort of getting worse and worse. So, again, spiritual wellness practices have been commodified, and they're often by like thin white entrepreneurs. And the $1 billion wellness industry profits from insecurity, selling transformation as something you can buy, usually from a thin white woman in a priestess dress. The spiritual consumerism repackages colonial ideas, erasing the roots of these traditions and reinforcing the very body norms they were meant to transcend. So a friend of mine wrote her master's thesis on how the weight loss and wellness industries use spiritual language in their marketing ads. And she pointed out some of them to me, and then poof, this popped up. Not exactly what I was like waiting for or expecting, but WTF. If the path to spiritual enlightenment requires you to shrink your body, it's probably not a path, it's a product. It's a marketing scheme of some kind. I mean, actors might relate to this one, you know, when you're trying to get signed early on in the industry, and you know, if you get signed and they require you to pay for something up front, you know it's a scam. It's the same deal, you know. The Buddha, for example, didn't like go pay someone to do something for him somewhere. He went off on a journey, on a quest by himself. And that is, well, we can talk about the helpers along the way, but essentially none of these helpers sold him a product, right? No one's selling him anything. He achieved enlightenment. Not through a product, but through himself, through a quest, right? And no, I'm not promoting an unhealthy lifestyle. More often than not, someone's weight is really not a reflection of their health. Now, it could be. Someone could be unhealthy and have a larger body, just like someone could be unhealthy and have a thinner body. They're not mutually exclusive. But I ask you, why do you assign unhealthiness or bad or something morally wrong not spiritual healthy to someone with a large body when you're not doing it to someone with a thin body. That's where fatphobia steps in. You're not here to give me spiritual guidance or give me wellness guidance. You're here because something about my fat body is an affront to you and your perceptions of what things should be like. So, what can you do to combat fat phobia in spiritual spaces? Decolonize and diversify. Look around your spaces. Are you profiting off of the spiritual paths of other people who aren't even in the room? Why aren't they there? What messages does your marketing send? Have you really created a welcoming space for all people? Speak up. Call out fatphobic practices even when they are masked as health advice. Nobody asked you, Brenda. Celebrate fat embodiment as sacred. Teach that spirituality involves the body, especially bodies that have been historically marginalized. Fat phobia in spiritual spaces is not just a personal wound. It is a systemic issue rooted in colonialism, racism, and capitalism. The body is not something to overcome. It's something to come home to. That's my message for you today. That's all I've got. I promise that I'm going to be posting more. A little bit of a life update. I quit my job. Woo! One of them. I'm finishing out the semester, so I'm working through the month of September. And around that time, I will also be leaving a lot of social media spaces so that I can really focus on creating the work and the content that I want to do in the world, and also finishing my dissertation proposal. Don't even ask. We'll get there another day. But I have noticed recently that I'm just consuming. And there's probably a need for a video on spiritual bypassing as well. But what I found is that all I'm doing is consuming. I'm not just consuming like things that are educational. I'm consuming nonsense and like, get ready with me and this new lipstick palette, and like, that's fine, but it's not doing any good for my mental health, my emotional well-being, or my physical health. And I want to create and produce. And I found that, having like 7 jobs and being a full-time PhD student makes it difficult to produce content like this that I think is really important. And so I'm shifting gears. Lumina has a ton of incredible workshops coming up. If you're seeing this video, we've just started our Dreaming Temple, which is a 4-week incubator for cultivating your dreams and learning how to lucid dream and tap into those watery realms. And starting in September and October heavy, there's going to be just incredible offerings, and I'll link everything below, and I hope that you check them out. Some are in person, many are virtual, but this work is really important to me. It's my life's work to connect with other women, to connect with people who are looking for community, who are looking for spaces where they can just be, and who maybe want to learn about alternate spiritual paths that allow for the full expression of yourself. Without these ideas, like fatphobia, for example, impeding how you show up for yourself and how you feel. And that's where the work lives for me. It lives in spiritual activism. It lives in supporting the most vulnerable people. And it lives in uplifting women's voices. And so if that sounds like your jam, check out the Patreon, check out the new Substack, check out my website and my coaching services, check out my workshop offerings, and we could create workshops together. I can come and present at anything that you are doing. I can create rituals and spells for you. There's a whole bunch of goodies that are going to be launching And it's my birthday month. So make sure you say happy birthday. Okay. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.